The stars above the colony of New Harlem shone bright against the black sky. Maya Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead as she worked in her metal workshop. The year was 2347, and humans now lived on many different planets far from Earth. Maya had been working since sunrise, and the day was almost over. Her workshop sat on the edge of the industrial zone, where large machines hummed and sparked all day long. She loved this place because here she could build anything she imagined. Maya was 35 years old and had dark brown skin that carried the heritage of her ancestors from old Earth. Her hands were strong from years of working with tools and machinery. She wore thick work clothes covered with oil stains and burn marks. Around her waist hung a belt with different tools she used every day. Her hair was pulled back tight so it would not get caught in the machines. She had built half of the buildings in this colony with her own designs and her own hands. The workshop was filled with amazing technology that would have seemed like magic to people from the past. There were machines that could cut through the strongest metals like butter. There were computers that could design entire buildings in seconds. There were tools that used gravity itself to shape and bend materials. Maya understood all of these machines better than anyone else in the colony. She had studied engineering on Earth, and then continued learning as she traveled to the outer colonies. Tonight she was working on a special project. The colony needed new support beams for the main dome that protected everyone from the harsh atmosphere outside. Maya had designed beams that were lighter but stronger than anything used before. She was testing the final piece when she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she thought it might be one of her assistants coming back from dinner. But the footsteps sounded wrong. They were too heavy and too slow. Maya turned around and saw a man standing in the doorway of her workshop. He wore the uniform of the Colonial Security Force. The uniform was dark blue with silver badges that showed his rank. His name tag said Officer Greg Sullivan. Maya had seen him around the colony before, but they had never spoken. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel uncomfortable. His eyes were cold and his mouth was set in a hard line. Officer Sullivan was a big man in his late 40s with pale skin that never seemed to tan even under the bright colony lights. His hair was cut very short and gray was starting to show at the temples. He had been a security officer for more than 20 years. In that time, he had developed strong opinions about who belonged in the colonies and who did not. These opinions were not based on facts or logic. They were based on old prejudices that humans had carried with them from Earth. Maya set down her tools and walked toward the officer. She wondered why he was here so late at night. The industrial sector was usually empty after sunset. Most workers went home to their families or to the recreation centers. Maya often worked late because she loved her job and because she had no family waiting for her. She had come to New Harlem alone 5 years ago, looking for a fresh start and a chance to build something meaningful. Sullivan did not say hello or explain why he was there. He just stood in the doorway staring at Maya with those cold eyes. The silence stretched out between them like a physical thing. Maya felt her heart start to beat faster. Something was wrong here. She had grown up learning to trust her instincts about danger. Her grandmother had taught her that long ago when she was just a little girl living in the crowded streets of Old Houston. Finally, Sullivan spoke. His voice was rough like gravel scraping against metal. He asked what Maya was doing working so late. He said he had received reports of unusual energy readings from this sector. He said he needed to investigate, but the way he said it made Maya think he was lying. There were no unusual energy readings. Her machines were all running at normal levels. She checked the monitoring systems every hour. Maya explained that she was working on the new support beams for the main dome. She offered to show Sullivan her work permits and safety certifications. Everything she did was completely legal and approved by the colony administration. But Sullivan did not seem interested in permits or certifications. He took a step forward into the workshop. Then another step. He was moving toward the workbench where Maya kept her tools. On the workbench sat the graviton hammer that Maya had been using earlier. It was a beautiful tool made of silver metal that glowed slightly with internal power. The hammer could manipulate gravitational fields to shape the strongest materials. In the hands of a skilled engineer, it was an instrument of creation, but in other hands, it could be a weapon. The hammer weighed about 20 kilograms and could generate enough force to crush solid steel. Sullivan reached the workbench and picked up the graviton hammer. He held it in both hands, feeling its weight. Maya felt alarm bells going off in her mind. This was not right. Officers were not supposed to touch equipment in private workshops. There were rules about that. She opened her mouth to tell Sullivan to put the hammer down. But before she could speak, she saw something in his face that made her blood run cold. It was hatred. Pure, simple hatred written clearly across his features. Maya had seen that look before in old videos from Earth history. It was the look that people wore when they had convinced themselves that someone else was not really human. That someone else did not deserve the same rights and protections as everyone else. It was the look that had caused so much suffering throughout human history. And now here it was again, centuries later, and light years away from Earth. Maya realized in that moment that Sullivan had not come here because of energy readings. He had come here because he had been watching her, waiting for a moment when she was alone, waiting for a moment when there were no witnesses. The security cameras in this sector had been offline for maintenance for the past week. Maya had reported it to administration, but the repair crew was backed up with other work. No one would see what happened here tonight. Sullivan took a step toward Maya, holding the hammer. His knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. Maya backed up slowly, trying to keep distance between them. Her mind was racing through options. She could run, but Sullivan was blocking the main door. She could fight, but he was much bigger and stronger than her. She could scream, but no one would hear her in this empty sector. She needed to think like an engineer. Engineers solved problems by understanding the systems around them. The workshop was her system. She had designed it. She had built it. She knew every machine, every control panel, every safety feature. This was her territory, not his. Sullivan might have strength and hatred on his side, but Maya had knowledge. And in that moment, knowledge was the only weapon she needed. Her hand moved slowly toward the control panel on the wall. She just needed a few more seconds. Just a few more seconds, and she could turn the tables on this man who thought he could hurt her. Sullivan raised the hammer above his head, his face twisted with rage and something else. Something like satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought Maya was helpless. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated her, and that mistake was about to cost him everything. Maya's fingers touched the control panel on the wall. Her neural implant connected to the workshop systems faster than thought itself. Every engineer who worked with dangerous equipment had these implants installed. They allowed direct communication between the human brain and computer systems. Maya had gotten hers 5 years ago when she first started working with advanced machinery. Now it was about to save her life. The hammer came down toward her head. Sullivan put all his strength behind the swing. He meant to kill her right there in her own workshop. But Maya was already moving. The neural implant slowed down her perception of time. To her it felt like Sullivan was moving through thick water. She could see every detail. The hatred in his eyes. The sweat on his forehead. The way his muscles tensed as he brought the heavy tool down. Maya sent a command through her implant to the workshop computer. The electromagnetic field generators built into the floor activated instantly. These generators were normally used to hold metal pieces in place while Maya worked on them. They created powerful magnetic fields that could grip steel like invisible hands. Now Maya turned those fields on the graviton hammer itself. The hammer suddenly jerked sideways in Sullivan's grip. The gravitational field inside the tool reacted badly with the electromagnetic field Maya had created. Physics took over. The hammer flew out of Sullivan's hands like it had been yanked by a giant. It sailed across the workshop and slammed into the far wall. The impact was so hard it dented the reinforced metal. The hammer stuck there embedded in the wall like a nail driven into wood. Sullivan stumbled forward off balance. He had expected to hit Maya with the hammer. Instead, he hit nothing but air. He caught himself on the workbench and turned to look at her. The hatred in his face mixed with surprise and something new, fear. He had thought this would be easy. He had thought Maya would be helpless. He was starting to realize he had made a terrible mistake. Maya stood by the control panel, breathing hard. Her heart pounded in her chest. Adrenaline flooded her system, making everything sharp and clear. She had trained for emergencies, but she had never thought she would face something like this. An officer of the law trying to murder her in cold blood. But there was no time to process that now. She had to act fast before Sullivan recovered and tried something else. Sullivan reached for his belt. He wore a plasma baton there. It was a standard weapon for security officers. When activated, it generated a field of superheated plasma that could cut through almost anything. It was meant for extreme emergencies only. Using it on a civilian without justification was strictly forbidden. But Sullivan clearly did not care about rules anymore. His hand closed around the baton and started to pull it free. Maya was faster. Her implant was already connected to the workshop systems. She knew every safety feature, every emergency protocol. One of those protocols was designed to protect engineers from dangerous radiation leaks or explosive decompression. It used containment fields to isolate dangerous areas. Maya activated that system now. But instead of isolating a machine, she isolated Sullivan himself. A shimmering field of blue energy appeared around Sullivan. It formed a cylinder about 2 meters wide that enclosed him completely. The field was not painful. It did not shock or burn, but it was absolutely solid. Sullivan pushed against it with his hands. The field did not move. He slammed his shoulder into it. The field absorbed the impact without even rippling. He was trapped as surely as if he had been locked in a steel cage. Sullivan's face went red with rage. He shouted at Maya. The containment field muffled his voice, but she could still hear him. He screamed curses and threats. He demanded she release him immediately. He said she was under arrest for assaulting an officer. He said she would spend the rest of her life in prison. But his words had no power now. He was the one trapped. He was the one helpless. The tables had turned completely. Maya walked slowly to her desk on shaking legs. The adrenaline was starting to fade and shock was setting in. She had almost died. If she had been 1 second slower, Sullivan would have crushed her skull with that hammer. If she had not known her workshop so well, she would be dead right now. The reality of that hit her like a physical blow. She sat down hard in her chair and tried to steady her breathing, but she could not afford to fall apart yet. She needed to call for help. She needed to report what had happened. Most importantly, she needed to make sure there was evidence. Sullivan was a security officer. He had power and connections. If it was just her word against his, she might lose. The system was supposed to be fair, but Maya knew that fairness often depended on who you were and what you looked like. Maya activated her communication implant. She sent out an emergency signal on the colony-wide network. Within seconds, responses started flooding in. Other engineers asked if she was okay. Medical personnel said they were on the way. Colony administrators demanded to know what was happening. And other security officers different from Sullivan started asking for details. Help was coming. She was not alone anymore. But Maya did something else too, something that would change everything. She accessed the workshop computer and checked the security recording system. She had been testing a new system that evening. It was designed to record everything that happened in the workshop in perfect detail. The old cameras were broken, but this new system used dozens of tiny sensors scattered throughout the room. It captured not just video but also audio and even environmental data. Maya pulled up the recording. Her hands moved quickly across the holographic controls. She watched the playback. There she was working peacefully. There was Sullivan entering. There was the conversation. There was Sullivan picking up the hammer. There was the hatred on his face clear as day. There was the attempted murder. Everything was recorded. Every single moment was preserved in crystal clear quality. The recording showed the truth. It showed that Sullivan had attacked her without provocation. It showed that she had defended herself only after he tried to kill her. It showed that his actions were motivated by hatred, not by any legitimate security concern. This recording was proof. Undeniable proof that could not be argued away or explained as a misunderstanding. Sullivan had destroyed himself, and the recording showed exactly how. Maya made a decision in that moment. A decision that took courage. She could keep this recording private. She could show it only to the investigators. Maybe the whole thing could be handled quietly. Maybe it would not have to become a big public scandal. But something in her rebelled against that idea. This was not just about her and Sullivan. This was about something bigger, something that needed to be brought into the light. She copied the recording and began uploading it to the colony network. From there, it would spread to other colonies through the quantum communication system. Within hours, people across human space would be able to see what had happened. They would see the truth. They would see that hatred still existed even hundreds of years after humans left Earth. They would see that violence still threatened innocent people, and maybe seeing it would make them do something about it. The upload began. The progress bar moved slowly across her screen. Maya watched it climb from 1% to 5% to 10%. Inside the containment field, Sullivan had stopped shouting. He seemed to realize that something was happening. He stared at Maya with an expression that mixed rage with growing fear. He understood that his life as he knew it was over. Maya heard footsteps outside. Multiple people running toward the workshop. Help was arriving. security officers who actually cared about protecting people, medical staff ready to check if she was injured, colony officials ready to investigate. The workshop that had been so empty and isolated just minutes ago was about to fill with people. But Maya kept her eyes on the progress bar. 20%, 30%, 40%. The door burst open. 5 security officers rushed in with their weapons drawn. They looked around quickly, assessing the situation. They saw Maya sitting at her desk unharmed. They saw Sullivan trapped in the containment field. They saw the hammer stuck in the wall. One of the officers was a woman named Captain Laura Pierce. She holstered her weapon and walked quickly to Maya. She asked if Maya was hurt. Maya shook her head no. She was physically fine. Emotionally was another question, but that could wait. Captain Pierce looked at Sullivan in the containment field. Her face went hard as stone. She asked Maya what happened. Maya told her in simple, clear words. She told her about Sullivan entering the workshop, about him taking the hammer, about him trying to kill her, about defending herself. Captain Pierce listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, the captain nodded slowly. She said that Maya had done exactly the right thing. She said that Sullivan would face justice. The progress bar reached 100%. The upload was complete. The recording was now spreading across the network like wildfire in dry grass. There was no taking it back now. What had happened in this workshop would soon be known throughout human space. Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. She had set something in motion that she could not stop. All she could do now was wait and see what happened next. The recording spread across human space faster than anyone expected. Within 2 hours it had reached Earth. Within 4 hours it had reached the outer colonies. Within 6 hours it had been viewed by more than 10 billion people. The quantum communication networks that connected humanity's scattered settlements carried the recording like a message that could not be ignored. People everywhere stopped what they were doing to watch. On Earth and the great cities that stretched high into the sky, people gathered in public squares to watch the recording on massive screens. They saw Maya working peacefully in her workshop. They saw Sullivan enter with evil intentions. They saw the attempted murder. They saw Maya defend herself with intelligence instead of violence. When the recording ended, there was silence for a long moment. Then people began to speak. Then they began to shout. Then they took to the streets. In the underground cities of Mars, where miners and engineers lived and worked, the recording played on every screen. The people there understood machinery and tools. They understood how skilled Maya must be to use her workshop system so quickly. They understood that she had turned instruments of creation into instruments of defense. They respected that, but they were also angry. Angry that one of their own had been attacked. Angry that hatred had followed humanity even to the stars. On the space stations that orbited gas giants and dead planets, the recording was watched by people from hundreds of different backgrounds. They saw in Maya's face something they recognized. The fear of being judged not by your skills or your character, but by the color of your skin or the place you came from. Many of them had experienced similar hatred. Maybe not as violent as what Sullivan tried to do, but the same poison running through different veins. The response was overwhelming and immediate. Protests erupted on every major human settlement. People demanded justice not just for Maya, but for everyone who had ever been targeted by prejudice. They demanded changes to how security forces operated. They demanded accountability. They demanded that humanity finally deal with the old hatreds that kept resurfacing, generation after generation. The protests were peaceful, but they were loud, and they could not be ignored. Colony administrators across human space held emergency meetings. They watched the recording and knew they had to act. Some of them had known that prejudice existed in their security forces. Some had looked the other way because it was easier than confronting the problem. Now they had no choice. The whole galaxy was watching. History was watching. They could either be remembered as the people who finally fixed this problem, or as the people who let it continue. But something unexpected happened too. The recording reached beyond human space. Humanity was part of a larger galactic community now. Other species existed throughout the galaxy. Some were friendly, some were neutral, some were suspicious of the violent newcomers from Earth. These alien species had their own communication networks and their own ways of sharing information. The recording of Maya and Sullivan reached them too. The Catharian were a species made of living crystal. They communicated through patterns of colored light that flickered across their surfaces. They had been watching humanity for decades, trying to understand these strange creatures who could be both brilliant and cruel. The Catharian ambassador sent a message that was broadcast across all communication channels. The translation came through in words humans could understand. The message said that humanity contained both light and darkness like all species. But what mattered was which one humanity chose to amplify. The Catharian praised Maya for choosing knowledge over violence. They praised her for capturing truth instead of seeking revenge. They said this showed that humans could grow beyond their violent past, but they also warned that growth required constant effort. One good action did not erase centuries of bad ones. The Vrin Collective was a hive-mind species where millions of individuals shared one consciousness. They had always been suspicious of humanity's chaotic individualism. To them, humans seemed dangerously unpredictable. Each human could make their own choices without consulting the group. This seemed like a recipe for disaster, but the recording made them reconsider. They sent their own message to human space. The Vrin said they had not understood human nature before. They had thought human individualism was a weakness. But Maya showed them something new. She showed them that a single human acting alone could choose civilization over barbarism. She could choose the hard right instead of the easy wrong. The Vrin said this capacity for individual moral choice might actually be humanity's greatest strength. But only if humans used it wisely. Other species sent their own messages. Some praised Maya. Some criticized human society for allowing someone like Sullivan to have power. Some said they had expected nothing less from a violent species. Some said they now had hope that humanity could evolve into something better. The galactic community was divided in its opinions. But everyone agreed on one thing. What happened in that workshop mattered. It mattered to humans, and it mattered to everyone who had to deal with humans. Back on New Harlem Colony, Maya sat in a medical center being checked for injuries. Captain Pierce had insisted she get examined even though Maya said she was fine. The doctors found some bruises and elevated stress hormones, but nothing serious. Physically, she was okay. Mentally was harder to measure. She kept replaying the moment when Sullivan raised that hammer. She kept thinking about how close she had come to dying. A colony administrator named Director Kevin Hart came to speak with her. He was a tall man with gray hair and worried eyes. He apologized for what happened. He said that Sullivan would face the full consequences of his actions. He said that the security force would be investigated from top to bottom. He said that changes would be made. Maya listened to his words and wanted to believe them. But she had heard promises before. Words were easy. Action was hard. Director Hart seemed to read her skepticism. He pulled out a data tablet and showed her something. It was a list of new policies that colony leadership had drafted in the past few hours. New training requirements for security officers. New oversight committees with real power. New systems for reporting abuse. New consequences for officers who violated citizens' rights. The list went on and on. It was comprehensive and detailed, but what impressed Maya most was the timeline. The policies would be implemented within 30 days. Officers who refused the new training would be dismissed. The oversight committees would include ordinary citizens, not just administrators. Every security officer would wear a camera that could not be turned off. The data would be stored in systems that officers could not access or delete. These were real changes with real teeth. Director Hart said that New Harlem would become a model for other colonies. He said that what happened to Maya could never happen again. Not here, not anywhere. He said that humanity had to be better than its worst members. He said that the galaxy was watching and humanity needed to show that it could learn from its mistakes. His words sounded sincere. Maya hoped they were. She hoped this was not just politics and empty promises. News crews arrived at the colony wanting to interview Maya. She refused most of them. She did not want to be famous. She did not want to be a symbol or a hero. She just wanted to go back to her workshop and build things. But Captain Pierce convinced her to do one interview, just one, to tell her story in her own words before others started telling it for her. Maya agreed reluctantly. The interview was broadcast live across human space. Maya sat in a simple chair wearing her work clothes. The interviewer was a woman named Sophie Turner, who had a reputation for asking tough questions but treating people fairly. Sophie asked Maya to explain what happened. Maya told the story simply and clearly. She did not exaggerate or dramatize. She just told the truth. Sophie asked how Maya felt about Sullivan. Maya thought for a long moment before answering. She said she felt sad more than angry. Sad that someone could carry so much hatred in their heart. Sad that centuries of human progress had not cured this disease. Sad that she had to defend herself from someone who was supposed to protect her. But she also said she felt hope. Hope that by showing the truth people would demand change. Hope that her experience could prevent others from suffering. Sophie asked what Maya wanted to happen next. Maya looked directly into the camera when she answered. She said this was not about revenge. This was not about punishing one bad officer. This was about changing the system that allowed officers like Sullivan to have power. This was about building a future where everyone was safe, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. This was about humanity choosing to be better. The interview ended and Maya went back to the medical center to rest. But she could not sleep. Her mind kept racing. She thought about Sullivan locked in a cell somewhere. She thought about all the people watching her story. She thought about the future. Would things really change, or would everyone forget about this in a few weeks? Would Sullivan's trial mean anything? Or would he get a light sentence and be back on the streets? Would other officers learn from this, or would they just be more careful about not getting caught? Maya did not have answers to these questions. All she could do was wait and hope. Hope that humanity would finally deal with its oldest and ugliest problem. 3 months passed before Sullivan's trial began. Those months were difficult for everyone involved. Maya tried to return to normal life, but normal felt impossible now. Every time she entered her workshop, she remembered that night. Every time she picked up a tool, she thought about the hammer Sullivan had tried to kill her with. She considered moving to a different colony, but something stopped her. Running away felt like letting Sullivan win. The trial was held on Gateway Station, which orbited Earth. Gateway was the administrative center for all human colonies. It was a massive structure that housed tens of thousands of people. The station had courts and government offices and diplomatic quarters where human leaders met with representatives from alien species. Holding the trial there sent a message. This was not just a local matter. This was something that concerned all of humanity. The courtroom was designed to hold physical attendees and also broadcast to billions watching across space. Holographic displays lined the walls showing feeds from different colonies and planets. People everywhere could watch the proceedings as if they were sitting in the room. The judge was a woman named Patricia, Okafor from the Nigerian Confederation on Earth. She had 40 years of experience and a reputation for absolute fairness. Judge Okafor was a stern woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back tight. Her dark eyes missed nothing. She had seen every kind of crime and every kind of excuse. She did not tolerate lies or manipulation. The lawyers on both sides respected her and maybe feared her a little. When she entered the courtroom, everyone stood. When she sat down and called the court to order, everyone paid attention. Sullivan sat at the defense table wearing a plain gray suit. He looked different than he had that night in the workshop. He looked smaller somehow. His face was pale and drawn. He had lost weight during his time in custody. His lawyer was a man named Henry Blake who had taken the case because someone had to. Blake did not believe Sullivan was innocent. No one who saw the recording could believe that, but everyone deserved legal representation, even people who did terrible things. The prosecutor was a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, no relation to Maya. She was known as one of the toughest prosecutors in human space. She had built her career fighting corruption and abuse of power. When she was assigned to this case, she vowed to get justice for Maya and for everyone who had ever been targeted by hatred. She prepared for weeks, studying every detail of the evidence. The trial began with opening statements. Carmen stood and addressed the court. She spoke clearly and forcefully. She said this case was about abuse of power and attempted murder. She said Sullivan had used his position as a security officer to attack an innocent woman. She said he had done it because of prejudice and hatred. She said the evidence would show beyond any doubt that Sullivan was guilty. She said justice demanded a strong response. Henry Blake gave his opening statement next. He spoke more quietly and carefully. He said Sullivan had made terrible mistakes. He said his client's actions were indefensible, but he argued that Sullivan had suffered from untreated mental health issues. He argued that years of stress and trauma had damaged Sullivan's judgment. He asked the court for mercy in sentencing. He did not argue innocence because he could not. The evidence was too clear. The prosecution began presenting evidence. Carmen played the recording from Maya's workshop. The courtroom fell silent as people watched. Even though billions had already seen it, watching it in court felt different. It felt more real and more terrible. People saw Sullivan enter with hatred in his eyes. They saw him take the hammer. They saw him try to murder Maya. When the recording ended, Judge Okafor sat back in her chair looking deeply troubled. Carmen called witnesses. She called Captain Laura Pierce, who testified about finding Sullivan trapped in the containment field. She called the technicians who analyzed the workshop systems and confirmed that Maya had acted only in self-defense. She called other officers who testified about Sullivan's history of complaints and suspicious behavior. A pattern emerged. Sullivan had been a problem for years, but nothing had been done about it. Then Carmen called Maya to testify. Maya walked to the witness stand wearing simple professional clothes. She looked nervous but determined. Carmen asked her to describe what happened that night. Maya told her story in the same clear, simple way she had told it before. She did not cry or show anger. She just stated facts. But her words carried weight because everyone knew they were true. Henry Blake cross-examined Maya, but gently. He knew attacking her would make Sullivan look even worse. He asked if Sullivan had said anything that explained his actions. Maya said no. Sullivan had barely spoken at all. He had just attacked. Blake asked if Maya thought Sullivan could be rehabilitated. Maya paused before answering. She said she hoped anyone could change if they truly wanted to, but she did not know if Sullivan wanted to change. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Carmen asked Maya what she wanted to say to the court. Maya turned to look directly at the camera that broadcast to billions of viewers. She spoke slowly and carefully, choosing each word. She said this trial was not really about her and Sullivan. It was about what kind of species humanity wanted to be. Humans had left Earth to escape their problems, but they had brought those problems with them. Maya said that every colony, every station, every ship in space carried both human greatness and human cruelty, both the capacity to build and the capacity to destroy. She said that what mattered was which capacity humanity chose to amplify. She said that if humanity wanted to survive among the stars, it had to finally deal with the old hatreds that kept resurfacing. She said that today in this courtroom, humanity was making a choice about its future. The courtroom was absolutely silent when Maya finished. Judge Okafor nodded slowly. Carmen sat down, looking satisfied. Henry Blake looked like he wanted to object but could not find grounds. Maya had not attacked Sullivan personally. She had simply told a truth that everyone needed to hear. She walked back to her seat and the trial continued, but everyone knew her words would be remembered long after the legal details were forgotten. The defense presented its case over the next 2 days. Blake called psychologists who testified about Sullivan's mental state. They talked about stress and trauma, and how it could warp a person's thinking. They talked about treatment and rehabilitation. They suggested that Sullivan could become a productive member of society again, with proper help. Their testimony was professional and thorough, but it could not change what Sullivan had done. Sullivan himself was called to testify. He walked to the stand looking like he wanted to disappear. Blake asked him questions about his background and his career. Sullivan answered in a flat voice. He talked about the things he had seen as an officer, the violence and tragedy. He talked about how it had affected him over the years, but he never really explained why he had attacked Maya. He never addressed the hatred that had been so clear on his face. Carmen cross-examined Sullivan harshly. She asked him directly if he had attacked Maya because of the color of her skin. Sullivan hesitated. Blake objected, but Judge Okafor overruled him. Carmen asked the question again. Sullivan finally admitted that yes, prejudice had played a role. He said he was ashamed. He said he knew it was wrong. But the admission came too late. It felt forced and empty. Both sides gave closing arguments. Blake argued for mercy and rehabilitation. Carmen argued for justice and accountability. She said that people in positions of power had to be held to the highest standards. She said that Sullivan had betrayed his oath and betrayed the trust placed in him. She said that a strong sentence would send a message that such betrayal would not be tolerated. The arguments were compelling on both sides, but everyone knew which way the verdict would go. Judge Okafor dismissed the court to consider her verdict. She said she would announce it the next day. That night Maya could not sleep. She lay in her quarters on Gateway Station staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow the trial would end. Tomorrow Sullivan would learn his fate, Tomorrow humanity would see if its justice system could actually deliver justice. Maya hoped it could. She hoped that all of this had meant something. The next morning the courtroom filled again. Judge Okafor entered and everyone stood. She sat down and looked at Sullivan. Her expression was grave. She began to speak. She said that she had spent the night reviewing all the evidence. She said that the facts were not in dispute. Sullivan had attempted to murder Maya because of prejudice. He had abused his power as an officer. He had violated every principle that security forces were supposed to uphold. Judge Okafor said she had considered the arguments for mercy. She had considered Sullivan's mental health issues and his years of service. But she said that none of those things excused what he had done. None of those things made Maya less of a victim. None of those things changed the fact that Sullivan had tried to kill an innocent woman. She said that justice required consequences. Real consequences that would show humanity that such actions would not be tolerated. Then Judge Okafor announced the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, abuse of authority, hate crimes. The sentence was 15 years in a rehabilitation facility, followed by permanent removal from any position of authority. Sullivan would never be a security officer again. Maya returned to New Harlem Colony 1 week after the trial ended. The shuttle ride back felt strange. She was the same person who had left 3 months ago, but everything felt different. People recognized her now. They pointed and whispered. Some came up to thank her. Others just stared. Maya tried to smile politely, but she felt exhausted. She wanted things to go back to normal. She wanted to just be an engineer again. When she arrived at her workshop, she found something unexpected. Flowers covered the entrance. Hundreds of bouquets from all over human space. Messages were attached to many of them. Thank you for your courage. You inspired my daughter. You showed us how to stand up. Maya read a few of the messages and felt tears welling up. She had not done anything special. She had just defended herself. But apparently that meant something to people. Inside the workshop, everything was exactly as she had left it. The hammer was still embedded in the wall where it had struck. Someone had put a transparent case around it to preserve it. Maya stared at the hammer for a long time. Director Hart had asked if she wanted it removed. He had suggested turning the workshop into a memorial or museum. Maya had refused. This was her workspace. This was where she built things. She was not going to let Sullivan take that away from her. But she did make one compromise. She allowed one wall to be converted into a memorial, not just for her experience, but for all victims of hatred throughout history. The wall displayed names and faces that scrolled by in holographic light. People from Earth who had fought against prejudice. People from the colonies who had faced discrimination. The memorial was meant to remind everyone that the fight for equality never ended. Each generation had to choose to keep fighting. Maya tried to get back to work, but she found it difficult to concentrate. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow made her nervous. She realized that even though her body had healed, her mind had not. The trauma of that night lingered like a ghost. She could not pick up tools without remembering how Sullivan had used one as a weapon. She could not work alone without feeling watched and vulnerable. Captain Pierce noticed Maya struggling and suggested she see a counselor. Maya resisted at first. She thought counseling was for people who could not handle things on their own. But Pierce explained that everyone needed help sometimes. Dealing with trauma was not a sign of weakness. It was part of healing. Maya finally agreed and started seeing a therapist named Dr. Helen Park, who specialized in helping people recover from violent experiences. Dr. Park was a gentle woman with kind eyes who made Maya feel safe. She explained that what Maya was experiencing was normal. The human brain remembered dangerous situations to help protect against future threats, but sometimes those protective instincts became too strong and interfered with daily life. Park taught Maya techniques to manage her anxiety, breathing exercises, meditation, ways to ground herself when panic started to rise. Slowly, Maya began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. The panic attacks became weaker. She could work in her workshop for longer periods without feeling overwhelmed. It was not a straight path. Some days were better than others. But overall, she was moving forward. She was reclaiming her life from the shadow Sullivan had cast over it. And in doing so, she was proving something important. Victims could become survivors. Survivors could become strong again. One morning, Maya received a message that surprised her. It was from a young woman named Lisa Chen who lived on Gateway Station. Lisa explained that she had watched Maya's trial and been inspired. Lisa had grown up poor in the lower levels of the station, where opportunities were limited. She had taught herself basic engineering from old textbooks but had no way to advance. She asked if Maya would consider taking her on as an apprentice. Maya's first instinct was to say no. She was still recovering herself. She did not feel ready to teach someone else. But something in Lisa's message touched her. The determination, the hunger to learn. It reminded Maya of herself at that age. She remembered how hard it had been to get opportunities, how many doors had been closed to her. Maybe she could open a door for Lisa that no one had opened for her. Maya sent a message back inviting Lisa to come to New Harlem. She offered a 6-month apprenticeship with room and board provided. If Lisa proved herself during that time, Maya would help her get into a proper engineering program. Lisa accepted immediately. 2 weeks later, she arrived on a transport ship carrying everything she owned in one small bag. She was 19 years old with bright eyes full of hope and nervousness. Teaching Lisa turned out to be exactly what Maya needed. It gave her a purpose beyond her own recovery. It reminded her why she loved engineering in the first place. The joy of solving problems, the satisfaction of building something that worked, the pleasure of watching someone else learn and grow. Lisa was a quick student who absorbed information like a sponge. She had raw talent that just needed proper training to flourish. As Lisa learned, Maya realized she was teaching more than just technical skills. She was teaching confidence. She was teaching that someone from the lower levels could make it. She was teaching that prejudice and poverty did not have to define your future. She was teaching the same lessons she had learned the hard way. But Lisa did not have to learn them the hard way because Maya was there to guide her. Word spread about what Maya was doing. Other engineers across human space heard about her apprenticeship program. Some contacted her asking for advice on starting similar programs. Others offered to help fund scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. A network began to form. Engineers who believed that talent existed everywhere but opportunity did not. Engineers who wanted to change that. 6 months after Lisa arrived, Maya received another surprise. A group of engineers had formed an organization called the Rodriguez Initiative. They wanted to create apprenticeship programs across all human colonies. They wanted to identify talented young people who lacked opportunities and give them the training they needed. They asked Maya to serve as honorary director. She wanted to refuse. She did not want her name attached to everything. But they convinced her that her name carried weight and would help open doors. Maya agreed on one condition. The initiative would not just be about her story. It would be about all the people who had overcome barriers. All the engineers who had succeeded despite facing discrimination. All the students who refused to let circumstances limit them. The Rodriguez Initiative would celebrate human potential in all its diverse forms. It would show that great engineers came in every color from every background. Talent was universal even if opportunity was not. The initiative grew quickly. Within a year, there were programs on 20 different colonies. Within 2 years, there were programs on 50 colonies. Thousands of young people got opportunities they never would have had. Many went on to become excellent engineers. Some designed new propulsion systems. Some created better life support technology. Some built the infrastructure that connected human settlements across space. They proved what Maya had always known. Give people a chance and they will amaze you. Lisa Chen herself became one of the initiative's success stories. After completing her apprenticeship, she enrolled in the prestigious Titan Engineering Academy. She graduated top of her class 3 years later. Her final project was a revolutionary plasma shielding system that protected colony transports from solar radiation. The design was so effective that it became standard equipment on all human ships. Lisa credited Maya with changing her life. But Maya said Lisa had changed her own life. Maya had just opened a door. As the Rodriguez Initiative expanded, Maya found herself thinking about Sullivan less and less. His attack had been meant to destroy her. Instead, it had created something positive. It had sparked a movement that helped thousands of people. It had shown humanity that progress was possible. Maya did not forgive Sullivan for what he had done. Forgiveness was complicated and maybe impossible. But she had moved past him. She had built something good from something terrible. One night, Maya stood in her workshop after everyone had gone home. She looked around at the machines and tools. She looked at the memorial wall with its scrolling names. She looked at the hammer still embedded in the wall behind its transparent case. This place had almost been the site of her death. Instead, it had become the birthplace of hope. That transformation meant something. It meant that darkness did not have to win. It meant that one person choosing to fight back could change the world. Maya thought about all the young engineers training in programs across human space. She thought about all the problems they would solve and the things they would build. She thought about the future they would help create. A future where someone's background mattered less than their ability. A future where everyone got a fair chance. It was not a perfect future. Prejudice still existed. Hatred still existed. But there were more people fighting against those things now. Someone knocked on the workshop door. Maya turned to see Lisa standing there holding 2 cups of coffee. Lisa had finished her shift at the academy for the day and come by to visit. She did that sometimes. She said Maya's workshop felt like home. They sat together drinking coffee and talking about engineering challenges. 2 women from different backgrounds connected by shared passion and mutual respect. 5 years passed since the night Sullivan attacked Maya. Those years brought many changes to human space. The reforms that started after the trial continued to spread and deepen. Security forces across all colonies underwent complete restructuring. New training programs taught officers not just about law enforcement, but about history and psychology, and the dangers of prejudice. Officers who could not pass the new standards were removed from duty. Every security officer now wore a camera that recorded continuously. The recordings were stored in systems that officers could not access or delete. Independent oversight committees made up of ordinary citizens reviewed complaints against officers. The committees had real power to discipline or fire officers who violated people's rights. These changes were not perfect. Some colonies implemented them better than others. But overall there was real progress. The kind of attack Sullivan had attempted was much harder to get away with now. The Rodriguez Initiative continued to grow. By the 5-year anniversary, it had programs on over 100 colonies and space stations. More than 10,000 students had gone through apprenticeships. Many became successful engineers and scientists. Some started their own companies. Some joined government research programs. Some returned to their home communities to teach the next generation. The initiative proved that investing in people paid off in ways that could not be measured just in money. Maya herself had trained 15 apprentices directly. Each one had gone on to do impressive work. She kept in touch with all of them. They formed a kind of extended family connected by shared values and experiences. When one of them had a breakthrough, they all celebrated. When one faced challenges, they all offered support. This network of mutual assistance was part of what made the initiative so effective. No one succeeded alone. Everyone lifted each other up. But Maya's life was not all work and apprenticeships. She had learned to make time for herself too. She dated occasionally, though nothing serious had developed. She made friends outside of engineering. She took up painting as a hobby and found she enjoyed creating art almost as much as creating machines. She learned that there was more to life than work. That healing meant not just recovering from trauma, but building a full and rich life. Dr. Park had continued to meet with Maya regularly, even after the worst of the trauma symptoms faded. Their relationship had evolved from therapist and patient to something more like mentor and friend. Park helped Maya understand that healing was not about forgetting what happened. It was about integrating the experience into her life story without letting it define her entire identity. Maya was not just a victim or a survivor. She was a complete person with many aspects to her character. The alien species that had commented on Maya's case 5 years ago continued to watch humanity's progress with interest. The Catharians sent periodic updates praising the reforms humanity had implemented. They said that few species managed to change their fundamental behaviors so quickly. They said humanity showed promise. The Vrin Collective also acknowledged the progress, though they warned that the hard work of maintaining these changes would be ongoing. Old patterns had a way of reasserting themselves if people became complacent. Some species remained skeptical. The Zarathian warrior clans said that talk was cheap and only time would tell if humans could truly overcome their violent prejudices. The sentient archives recorded everything humans did as data points in their long assessment of whether humanity would survive or destroy itself. The Void Speakers said nothing publicly, but their mathematical models of human civilization were updated to show slightly better odds of long-term survival. On the 5-year anniversary of the attack, New Harlem Colony held a public ceremony. Maya had not wanted a big event, but Director Hart convinced her it was important. He said that anniversaries gave people a chance to reflect on progress and recommit to the work ahead. He said that many young people who watched Maya's trial were now entering college or starting careers. They needed to be reminded of what one person's courage had accomplished. The ceremony was held in the main square of New Harlem's Central Dome. Thousands of people attended in person. Millions more watched via broadcast. Maya stood on a stage feeling nervous and slightly uncomfortable. She had never enjoyed public speaking, but she had learned that sometimes speaking up was necessary. Sometimes people needed to hear certain truths repeated even if they seemed obvious. Various speakers took the stage before Maya. Director Hart talked about the reforms implemented in the security forces. Captain Pierce talked about how the culture of law enforcement had changed. Lisa Chen talked about her own journey from poverty to success. Each speaker emphasized that progress required constant effort, that the fight for equality was never truly finished, that each generation had to choose to carry the torch forward. Finally, Maya took the microphone. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces of every color and background. She saw young people and old people. She saw engineers and teachers and doctors and farmers. She saw security officers wearing their new uniforms with pride. She saw the diversity that made humanity strong, and she spoke from her heart about what the past 5 years had taught her. Maya said that 5 years ago she had almost died in her workshop. But she had survived not through violence but through knowledge. She had used the tools around her to defend herself and to capture truth. That choice to seek truth instead of revenge had mattered. It had sparked changes that helped thousands of people. It had shown that one person's actions could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. But Maya warned against complacency. She said that prejudice was like rust on metal. It never fully disappeared. It had to be constantly cleaned away. Every generation had to choose to reject hatred and embrace common humanity. The reforms implemented after her attack were good, but they required vigilance to maintain. People in power would always be tempted to abuse that power. Citizens had to hold them accountable. Maya talked about the Rodriguez Initiative and what it meant. She said it was not charity. It was investment. When you gave talented people opportunities, they built things that benefited everyone. They solved problems that improved lives across human space. They proved that human potential existed everywhere, not just in privileged communities. The initiative had helped thousands of individuals, but it had also made all of humanity stronger and smarter. She talked about the importance of education. Not just technical education, but also education about history and ethics and human rights. Young people needed to learn about the mistakes of the past so they would not repeat them. They needed to understand where prejudice came from and how it operated. They needed tools to recognize it in themselves and others. Only through understanding could humanity hope to overcome its worst impulses. Maya said that she thought about Sullivan sometimes. She wondered if he had truly changed during his years in rehabilitation. She wondered if he understood what he had almost done. She wondered if he felt remorse or just regret at being caught. She did not know the answers and maybe never would. But she hoped that even someone as consumed by hatred as Sullivan had been could find redemption. She hoped because hope was better than bitterness. Finally, Maya talked about the future. She said that humanity stood at a crossroads like it had throughout history. One path led toward greater equality and mutual respect. The other path led toward division and violence. Which path humanity took depended on choices made every day by ordinary people. Choices about how to treat others. Choices about what to tolerate and what to oppose. Choices about what kind of world to build. She said that 5 years ago she had made a choice to fight back using knowledge instead of violence. To seek justice instead of revenge. To share truth instead of hiding it. Those choices had led to good outcomes, but they were not unique to her. Every person in the audience had the same power to make choices that pushed humanity toward its better nature. Every person could be a force for positive change in their own way. Maya finished her speech by thanking everyone who had supported her. The people who had shown up when she called for help. The lawyers who had fought for justice. The reformers who had changed the system. The engineers who had built the Rodriguez Initiative. The students who had taken chances on themselves. The ordinary citizens who had demanded better from their leaders. All of them had played a part in the progress of the past 5 years. The crowd gave Maya a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. She stood on the stage feeling overwhelmed. These people were celebrating her, but she knew the real work had been done by thousands of people making small choices every day. She was just the person who had sparked the fire. Others had kept it burning. That was how real change worked. It was never about one hero. It was always about communities coming together. After the ceremony, Maya returned to her workshop. Lisa was there working on a new design for improved atmospheric processors. They worked side by side for a while in comfortable silence. This was what Maya loved most. Not the speeches or the recognition, just the simple act of building things with people she cared about, creating solutions to problems, making life better in practical, tangible ways. This was what engineering meant to her. This was what it meant to be human at its best. 7 years after the attack, Sullivan was released from the rehabilitation facility. He had served his full sentence and completed all required therapy programs. The facility director said Sullivan had shown genuine progress in understanding his prejudices and learning to manage them. But the director also warned that change was fragile. Sullivan would need continued support and monitoring. One slip could undo years of work. Sullivan emerged from the facility a changed man, at least on the surface. He was older now, in his mid-50s, with gray hair and deep lines in his face. 7 years of therapy had forced him to confront truths about himself he had avoided his entire life. He had been required to study history, to read about the harm prejudice had caused throughout the ages, to meet with victims of hate crimes and hear their stories, to understand what he had almost done to Maya. As part of his release, Sullivan was required to give a public statement. He stood before cameras broadcasting to all of human space and spoke. His voice was quiet and hesitant. He said that he had been consumed by hatred for most of his adult life, that he had blamed others for his own failures and frustrations, that he had convinced himself certain people were less human than others, that he had almost murdered an innocent woman because of this poison in his mind. Sullivan said he could never fully undo the harm he had caused. He could never give Maya back the sense of safety he had stolen from her. He could never erase the fear he had created. But he could spend the rest of his life trying to be better, trying to speak out against the hatred he once embraced, trying to show through his actions that people could change if they truly wanted to. His words sounded sincere, but many people remained skeptical. Maya watched Sullivan's statement from her workshop. She had known this day was coming. Part of her had dreaded it. Part of her had wondered if she would feel anger or fear seeing Sullivan again. But as she watched him speak, she mostly felt sadness. Sadness for the years he had wasted on hatred. Sadness for the person he could have been if he had chosen differently. Sadness for everyone harmed by prejudice, including the people who harbored it. Sullivan was sent to work at a recycling facility on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It was hard physical labor, far from any position of authority. He would spend his days processing waste materials and helping maintain the facility's equipment. It was honest work but humble. A far cry from the power he once wielded as a security officer. Some people said the job was too easy a punishment. Others said rehabilitation was always better than permanent imprisonment. The debate about Sullivan's release went on for weeks. News programs discussed whether 7 years was enough for attempted murder. Ethicists argued about the purpose of punishment. Was it revenge or rehabilitation? Was it protection or reform? People across human space had strong opinions. Some believed in second chances. Others believed some crimes were unforgivable. There were no easy answers, and both sides made valid points. Maya chose not to participate in the debate. When reporters asked for her opinion, she declined to comment. She said that Sullivan had been tried and sentenced according to the law. He had served his time. What happened next was between him and the society he had harmed. She had moved on with her life and did not want to be pulled back into anger and trauma. She had work to do, students to teach, things to build. That was where she focused her energy. But Sullivan's release did spark important conversations. People talked about how to prevent officers from abusing power in the first place. They talked about early intervention when someone showed signs of prejudice. They talked about creating support systems for officers dealing with stress and trauma. They talked about accountability and transparency. These conversations led to further reforms. The system continued to improve slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, the Rodriguez Initiative celebrated its 10,000th graduate. The ceremony was held on Gateway Station with representatives from colonies across human space. Each graduate received a certificate and a toolkit containing equipment they would need to start their careers. But more valuable than the tools was the network they gained. 10,000 engineers connected by shared values and commitment to lifting each other up. That network was worth more than any physical equipment. The ceremony included speeches from several prominent graduates. Lisa Chen talked about how the initiative had changed her life. A young man named Carlos Martinez talked about growing up in the slums of Mars and believing he had no future. A woman named Aisha Ibrahim talked about facing discrimination as a refugee from Earth's war zones. Each story was different, but all shared common themes: opportunity, mentorship, hope. The power of people believing in you when you struggled to believe in yourself. Maya attended the ceremony and watched with pride. These young engineers represented the best of humanity. They came from difficult backgrounds but refused to let circumstances define them. They had worked hard and seized opportunities when offered. They would go on to build the ships and stations and systems that connected human civilization. And they would remember where they came from. Many would mentor others just as they had been mentored. The cycle would continue. After the ceremony, Maya met with several alien ambassadors who had attended. The Catharian representative communicated through flashing lights that translated to words of congratulation. The ambassador said the initiative was proof that humanity understood the importance of developing all its talent, regardless of origin. The Catharian had watched many species rise and fall. Those that survived invested in education and opportunity. Those that failed hoarded power and resources among elites. The Vrin Collective sent a delegation of 3 individuals who shared one consciousness. They said they had initially been skeptical of human individualism. They had thought individual freedom led to chaos and inequality. But the Rodriguez Initiative showed them something new. It showed that free individuals could choose to help each other. That freedom did not have to mean selfishness. That humans could be both independent and cooperative. The Vrin said they were revising their assessments of human potential upward. A representative from the Zarathian warrior clans also attended. The Zarathian were a proud species that valued strength and honor. Their representative said that the Zarathians had initially dismissed humanity as weak and divided. But watching the past 7 years had changed their minds. The Zarathian said that true strength was not just physical power. It was the strength to change, to admit mistakes, to build something better. Humanity had shown that strength. The most mysterious visitors were from the Void Speakers. These ancient beings rarely interacted with younger species. They communicated through complex mathematics that few could understand. But their message, once translated, was clear. Humanity had reached a critical juncture. The species could continue on its current path toward greater equality and cooperation, or it could backslide into old patterns of hatred and division. The choice would determine whether humanity survived to become a great galactic civilization or destroyed itself from within. Maya found the Void Speaker's message both inspiring and sobering. It reminded her that the work was never finished. That each generation faced the same fundamental choice. That progress was not inevitable. It required constant effort and vigilance. But it also reminded her that what humanity did mattered not just to humans but to the entire galaxy. Other species were watching and learning. Humanity's success or failure would influence the future of many civilizations. As the ceremony ended and people began to leave, Maya stood alone for a moment, looking out through a viewing windows of Gateway Station. Earth hung in space below a blue and white marble that seemed so peaceful from this distance. But Maya knew that up close Earth was still struggling with many problems. Inequality, prejudice, environmental damage. The problems that had driven humans to the stars in the first place. But Maya also saw hope. She saw it in the young engineers leaving the ceremony with dreams in their eyes. She saw it in the alien ambassadors who believed humanity could be better. She saw it in the reforms that continued to spread across human space. She saw it in the simple fact that people kept trying, kept working, kept believing that tomorrow could be better than today. That hope was fragile, but it was real. And as long as people held on to it, there was a chance. Lisa Chen joined Maya at the window. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Earth slowly rotate below them. Lisa asked if Maya ever regretted what happened, if she wished she could go back to the time before Sullivan attacked her, when her life was simpler and less complicated, when she was just an engineer without all this responsibility and attention. Maya thought about the question for a long time before answering. She said that of course she wished Sullivan had never attacked her. She wished she had never experienced that terror. She wished she still felt completely safe in her own workshop. But she did not regret what came after. She did not regret the changes that were made. She did not regret the students she had taught. She did not regret showing that one person could make a difference. Life was complicated and painful sometimes, but it was also full of meaning and purpose. Lisa nodded understanding. She said that Maya had taught her many things. 10 years passed since the night Sullivan attacked Maya in her workshop. Maya was now in her mid-40s with streaks of gray in her black hair. Her face carried lines that spoke of experience both painful and joyful. She still worked in the same workshop, though it had been expanded several times to accommodate more students and equipment. The hammer was still embedded in the wall behind its transparent case. A reminder of violence prevented and transformation begun. The Rodriguez initiative had grown beyond anything Maya imagined when it started. There were now programs on every human colony and major space station. Over 50,000 students had graduated. They worked in every field of engineering and science. They designed ships that traveled between stars. They built habitats that sustained life in hostile environments. They created technologies that improved lives across human space. The initiative had become a permanent institution that would outlast any individual. Maya had stepped back from day-to-day leadership of the initiative. She had trained others to take over administration and fundraising. She preferred to focus on what she loved most, which was teaching in her workshop. She typically had 5 or 6 apprentices at any given time, young people hungry to learn and eager to prove themselves. Maya gave them the knowledge and support they needed. They gave her purpose and hope for the future. Lisa Chen had become one of the most respected engineers in human space. Her plasma shielding designs were used on thousands of ships and stations. She had won numerous awards and honors, but she always credited Maya with making her success possible. Lisa now ran her own program teaching underprivileged students on Gateway Station. She had trained over 200 apprentices herself. The cycle continued as Maya had hoped it would. The reforms in security forces had become standard across all human territories. New officers grew up learning about the Sullivan case in their training. They studied what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar incidents. The culture had changed fundamentally. Officers who showed prejudice were quickly removed. Accountability was real and consistent. The system was not perfect, but it was vastly better than it had been 10 years ago. Sullivan was still alive, working his humble job on Europa. Reports said he kept to himself and caused no trouble. He attended therapy sessions regularly and participated in community service projects. Some people who worked with him said he seemed genuinely changed. Others remained skeptical. Maya had not thought about Sullivan much in recent years. He was part of her past, not her present. She had moved on completely. On the 10th anniversary of the attack, New Harlem Colony held another ceremony. It was smaller and quieter than the 5-year event. Maya appreciated that. She gave a brief speech thanking everyone who had worked to create positive change. She emphasized that the work was ongoing, that each generation had to choose equality and justice over prejudice and hatred, that progress was fragile and required constant protection. Her words were simple but heartfelt. After the ceremony, Maya returned to her workshop as she always did. 3 of her current apprentices were there working on projects. A young woman named Nina Singh was designing improved water recycling systems. A young man named Paulo Santos was developing better structural materials. A non-binary person named Jordan Lee was working on energy-efficient lighting. All 3 came from difficult backgrounds. All 3 had extraordinary talent. All 3 would change the world in their own ways. Maya watched them work with quiet satisfaction. This was her real legacy. Not the speeches or the awards or the historical significance, but these young people and thousands like them. People who got chances they might not have had. People who would build the future. People who would teach the next generation. This endless chain of knowledge and opportunity passing from one person to another. This was how humanity progressed, slowly, steadily, one person at a time. That evening, Maya received an unexpected visitor. Captain Laura Pierce, who had responded to Maya's emergency call 10 years ago, was retiring from the security force. She stopped by the workshop to say goodbye. The 2 women had become friends over the years. Pierce had been one of the driving forces behind security force reforms. She had fought against resistance from officers who wanted things to stay the same. She had never given up even when change seemed impossible. Pierce and Maya sat in the workshop drinking coffee and talking about the past decade. Pierce said she was proud of what had been accomplished but worried about backsliding. She said that vigilance was required to maintain reforms, that people had short memories and old prejudices could resurface if not actively opposed. She said the next generation of leaders would determine whether progress continued or reversed. Maya agreed and said that was why education was so important. They talked about Sullivan briefly. Pierce said she had visited him once on Europa out of curiosity. She said he seemed broken by what he had done, that he understood the magnitude of his crime in ways he had not during the trial, that he was trying to atone though he knew atonement was probably impossible. Pierce said she believed he had changed but also believed change did not erase harm. Both things could be true at the same time. Maya said she hoped Sullivan had found some peace. She did not forgive him and probably never would. But she did not hate him either. Hatred took too much energy. It consumed you from the inside. Maya had learned to let go of anger while still acknowledging the harm done. This balance was difficult but necessary for her own well-being. She wished Sullivan well without needing anything from him. That was enough. After Pierce left, Maya stayed late in the workshop as she often did. She walked around looking at the various projects in progress. She touched tools that had been used to create so many things. She looked at the memorial wall with its endless scroll of names. She looked at the hammer embedded behind glass. This workshop was more than a workspace now. It was a symbol of human resilience, a reminder that darkness did not have to win. Maya thought about everything that had happened in the past 10 years. The trial and the reforms, the Rodriguez Initiative and its thousands of graduates, the relationships she had built, the students she had taught, the slow, steady progress toward a more just society. It had been exhausting and difficult, but it had also been meaningful. Her life had purpose. Her work mattered. That was more than most people could say. She thought about the future, too. About the challenges humanity still faced. Prejudice still existed even if it was less openly acceptable. Inequality still existed even if opportunities were more widespread. Violence still existed even if it was less common. These problems would not disappear in her lifetime or perhaps ever. But each generation could make them a little better. Could push humanity a little closer to its ideals. That was the work. That was always the work. Maya looked out the workshop windows at the colony beyond. Lights glowed in buildings where people lived and worked. Ships moved through the dark sky carrying passengers and cargo. This colony had grown so much in the past decade. New sections had been added. New industries had developed. Thousands more people now called New Harlem home, all of them depending on infrastructure that engineers like Maya had built. All of them protected by security officers who had learned from past mistakes. Beyond the colony, the stars shone eternal. Humanity had spread to hundreds of worlds now. Millions of people scattered across the galaxy. Each settlement facing its own challenges. Each community working out how to live together. The great human experiment continued. Would the species survive its own worst impulses? Would it learn to embrace diversity as strength? Would it build a civilization worthy of the stars? No one knew the answers. But people like Maya were doing their part to make success possible. Maya turned away from the window and began shutting down the workshop systems for the night. Machines powered off one by one. Lights dimmed. The familiar hum faded to silence. She would return tomorrow and start again. There would always be work to do. Students to teach. Problems to solve. Things to build. The cycle never ended. But that was okay. The cycle gave life meaning. The work gave life purpose. The future gave life hope. As Maya prepared to leave, she paused one more time at the memorial wall. She touched the glass gently and whispered a promise. A promise to keep fighting for equality, to keep teaching young people, to keep building a better future, to never forget what happened here 10 years ago, to never let it happen again. The wall could not respond, but Maya felt the weight of all those names, all those people who had fought and suffered and persevered. She was part of that long tradition now. Her story added to countless others. Maya left the workshop and walked home through the quiet colony streets. Above her, the dome showed stars and distant galaxies. Humanity's reach had grown so vast, its achievements so impressive. But the most important work was not building ships or terraforming planets. The most important work was building character, teaching compassion, fighting hatred, creating systems that protected everyone. This work was harder than any engineering challenge, but it was also more important. When Maya reached her apartment, she looked back toward the industrial sector where her workshop sat. She could not see it from here, but she knew it was there. A small building on the edge of the colony where one woman had refused to be a victim.